for being invited. Thank you, Greg and Michelle, for inviting me, for InterAccess for hosting. I had a look at my name and I realized, you know, I could break apart my name and I find 4 of the words in there, and just thought like how strange that is, and how this, even just this here little bit shows a bit of my practice. So the and is in the center, and then reflected on both sides, mirroring is the is, and then you got the O's that are mirroring, and then you get a slight difference at the end. And I think that happens a lot in my work when I try to break words apart and to focus on them and find what other words are embedded in it. So that's just a small example. When I started working with text, and it feels strange for me to pull just text out of all my practice, so I'm putting together tonight just examples of the sculptures that involve text. So when I first started, I had been working on a project, and I wanted to ask artists and curators to participate in my project. So I bought a Smith Corona typewriter online on eBay, and I typed every letter to the 24 people. And I don't type, so it was just a crazy exercise with lots of mistakes. And what I found was, like, you know, that trace of the mistake that came with the typewriter and the typewritten form, and how ephemeral that was, and the kinetic act of hitting the key and the sound that it made, and all that was really kind of engaging for me. So I started to play around with trying to make art from the typewriter. Of course, as you know, there's a whole history of it, I'm sure, today that you discussed Malmaire and Apollinaire, and, you know, some of my favorite concrete poets were, you know, B.P. Nicol, and just, you know, this ability to take words and to be able to, you know, use them as a found object. They're very malleable. Take language and then, you know, create your own systems. So for me, I took the singular word heartbreaking, which is kind of an emotionally laden word, and my system was to exhaust every word that started with H, and then I went to every word that started with E, and moved, you know, along very uniformly. And this is actually a letterpress print, so it's done with leaded type, so it's Underwood, I think it's set 10 on 12. And it's the letterpress, which you can't get, you know, an idea of when you're looking at it digitally, but it's so beautiful how it's kind of pressed into the paper. And so this process of excavating all the words, so Heartbreaking 91, there was 90 other words that I found embedded in Heartbreaking. And the really great thing for me was the last word was ting. So I thought, oh my God, that's just like crazy how self-referential that is, that, you know, it's ending with the word ting. And so from there, you know, I made the letterpress prints, and I was just, again, like as in the concrete poets, the text is not only typed, but it becomes a visual pictorial shape on the page. So it was like rain going down a window, or there was just something really beautiful about how that, you know, spatially the text became a river on the page. So I did prints in both red edition and black. Tell me if I'm talking too fast, because I have 40 minutes, so I'm trying to get through without going over too much. So Heartbreaking was the first sculpture that I ever used text in. And I was really taken by that process of you know, excavating all these words. So what I did, the referent in Heartbreaking here is Scrabble. So you can kind of see that I'm using a Scrabble font. You know, there's a little number in the bottom right. The text is inlaid, so it's acrylic blocks, and the text is inlaid into the acrylic block. And so for me, my formal, or my aesthetic is to have everything, like the mechanics for me are a whole other language. They don't speak the same language as the text. So the mechanics in most of my sculptures, even though it's kinetic, are hidden. And so this is probably a better example. So what happens is the back of the paddles are white. So the beautiful thing when I did the heartbreaking print was because typography on a typewriter, it's monospace, which means that the spacing around it is always uniform. That allowed me to have uniformity when I was building the text on the page, and then that uniformity again comes into heartbreaking in the sculpture. So these are using servo motors, so they have like a little bit of a E sound, which I can maybe amplify. Oops, sorry, just on the back.
Where's Vanna?
Sorry?
I said, where's Vanna when you need?
Right, exactly. Everyone should have a Vanna. So it was interesting to me to see if any of the words like connected to the source word, or just kind of this, again, this process of a form of intertextuality where it was always reflecting back. And then I work a lot with a machinist. He's a friend of mine, and he used to be in scientific glass. So he had this bell jar, this glass bell jar, and he sold it to me. I think I paid $500 for it. It seemed like a lot at the time. And so I had it around my studio for a long time, and I guess, following on the trajectory of heartbreaking, I decided for the show, it was, this is coming out of a body of work from 2009, to do a piece based on catastrophes. So it comes from the saying, I suffered 1,000 catastrophes and most of them never happened. But for me, when you're going through them, they do. So what happens when you approach the piece is all those, my 1,000 catastrophes, which I had printed and cut all this paper, went into kind of this maelstrom and kind of reflecting of my inner neurosis. And what happened was, so when you come up to it, the sensors trigger the piece, but kids found out right away that if they went to the corner of the piece, that they could actually not trigger it and they could read all the text. So, and also my dealer would unplug the piece at night and have it go. So there was, as you can see, it was a crazy kind of endeavor that got me really depressed because I was reliving a lot of memories that I really didn't want to go back and excavate. And so just to give you a sense of when you work in this kind of way, it's, there's so many dependencies. I had to get the paper to swirl up. There's a certain resistance, it all wanted to pile in a corner. So in terms of the process of making mechanical art or kinetic art, it's very kind of, if you could do it more times than one, you'd really you'd really solve all your problems. But the issue is that you're solving your problems as you go along, and I had some catastrophes I could have added in, but the piece was already complete. So the making of the work is always a journey. So some of them is like, where is Emmy, which is the stray cat at the studio? She didn't show up last night and I haven't seen her today. Maybe the mouse that Emmy ate was poisoned and she's sick and dying somewhere. Maybe Emmy is locked in a garage. It rained yesterday. She could have gone for cover and got locked in by mistake. You hear these things. So that's enough. And by pursuing, like, you know, this idea around wordplay and the fact that you could change one letter in a word and linguistically, you know, shift the whole meaning, and just this kind of amazing aspect of, you know, the composition of language. And I used the word E-D-M-E, and I have a rotating disc, so there's four letters that get changed. So it's a bit like a command, a series of commands, but unlike Bruce Nauman, who is another artist who uses tech that I really admire, his some artists are much more authoritative, and I felt like mine was still kind of emotionally based, and it's coming from position of a female. And I spent forever on, you know, trying to get all the tracking on the text right, and I, you know, kind of come to the position where I was satisfied, and it was all lowercase. But it had like two, in the total four phases, that had two ascenders, and I was like, it just doesn't look right. And it was, I was using a sans serif font, and, you know, I'd spent so long on it, but then I just walked in one day. I had made a prototype just in out of styrofoam, and I realized that actually the type needs to be more intimate. So the sans serif wasn't intimate enough. And it also needed to be in one line to echo the proportions of the cylinder. So back to square one. So there is some irreverence towards death. I think of who's the woman on the East Coast that used to be in Leeds. She's very, well, I can't believe her name right now. But anyways, this, yeah, feed me, seed me, need me, lead me. Kind of going through this kind of life-lived experience. And, you know, the machine is very quiet. It was like incomprehensible to make this because the, you know, it's in the cylinder. So the tolerances were really, really tight, and the whole inside had to be cored out in order to house some of the mechanics. So the piece, you know, I wanted to do it in granite. I wanted this reference to be, you know, towards the memorial, and yeah, so granite it was. And then, like, sometimes people have a hard time reading this piece, but the piece is Sorrow. It helps with the title Sorrow Mirrored. So I had, for years and years, I've listened to the CBC radio in my studio, and I feel like, you know, I was just always inundated by other people's tragedies and this, you know, relentless kind of repeating of the news every half hour, every hour, and then, like, it's also mediated, and you're really, you know, you're filtering this experience all the time. So I was writing at the word sorrow, and again, I was really interested in the kind of, it's almost like a palindrome. Well, it is here because I've turned the R's in on themselves. So I used the Bauhaus font, and, you know, because these wings actually, or panels, or you could call them wings, move up mechanically, the wings, or the canes rather, had to be really light. So I used just glass tubing, and then because the mirror actually has to be poured in, so then cutting the letter form in half allowed, you know, for this idea of, you know, and the W is also split in half, or else it would have to be doubled back and behind. So the right portion here is separate. So there's this idea, like, when you give language material form, when you know, that was what, you know, happened with modernism, this idea that, you know, that the autonomy of the letter form, and then when you are invested in it, and when you really, you know, thinking about the typeface, it was kind of like a really rounded typeface, very full, kind of you know, a bit, for me it was a bit extended, and just the whole history of the Bauhaus. So what happens is, let's see. Sorry, it's a little loud. So I think of it like an elevator. The viewer comes to the elevator and Sorrow takes you up, and it covers the sorrow, but only for a little bit of time. And then it returns, and then it waits for the next person. Operates with the lead screw that pushes the panels up, and I made an edition of 3, which was a really bad idea. Nobody wants to buy sorrow. I don't know why. And then I was thinking about, you know, like when we're talking about language and type, and we're talking about context and contingency. I had done a piece which I call Timeline. So it starts on January 1st, 1990 and ends December 31st, 1999. So it's a decade of my life, and it includes my everywhere I lived, my financial records, my health records, my correspondence with everyone, everything I bought. So I had collected everything, and I guess I, you know, did it without purpose, really. And then I was thinking about like this idea of what makes a self-portrait, and just thinking, oh my God, like all this information, again, is a form of intertextuality, because it's also referencing other lives around me. And so I put it together. Oh my God, this was another nightmare, because it goes by time and by date. So the time, sometimes you can't find the time until you're like, you know, you're trying, things fade over time, and you know, it's very ephemeral. So it was quite a journey to put this piece together in sequence. But and then like when I was making the presentation, I was very aware at the height of the letters, mostly the pages are 8.5, 11, so this space down here is the same. So that as is above is below, there's like kind of this, you know, the void and the presence. And that's just what was my first thing there. I bought, I think, some fans from Clive Files or something. And then this one is a bit more like, you know, to be an artist is so hard. And these are all my acceptances and my rejections. So I think my acceptances are slightly larger than my rejections. And they started when I finished school, and they ended in 2012. So I obviously had collected more stuff and had it in different piles, and like I guess it's, you know, in many ways, you know, thinking about what constitutes the life of an artist, and what constitutes an artwork, and how an archive becomes an artwork. And then this kind of, you know, when you are dealing with information that is so personal, and then it goes out into the public space, then there is kind of, you know, this disclosure, and, you know, wherever it ends up or however, and the fact that it's ephemeral paper over time will disintegrate. But there was, you know, also it felt quite liberating to do that, just get rid of it. And when, you know, so I struggle with, you know, the idea of how we're connected to the larger picture, and so I, you know, in mechanics, and you'll see this a little bit later, there was this idea of the follower. So I was thinking, oh, the sun, you know, the moon follows the sun, and I had done a piece where I had photographed a candle, a street lamp and the moon, and I took it out because I thought I had too many slides. But this idea of allowing time to align, and then after that I got interested in this idea of, how we can put our everyday, ordinary experience, we can put it in the same category with the moon and the sun. So these are the words that come after sun and the words that come after moon, and sometimes they're shared, like, sun dance and moon dance. And other times they're not shared, like sundress and moonless. So if you put the dress and the less together, it's dressless. And if you put something like sunset and moon sail together, it's set sail. So I like that, this crossover of relationships, and that you could, you could through play and through your intuition and your responsiveness, you can create this dialogue, and things are interchangeable and malleable, like how Lawrence talks about text, and he uses it, when he uses it in a very flat form, he talks about how infinite it is, and the fact that it doesn't fall off the edge, because, the edge isn't containing it. So it's kind of a nice way to think about working with language. So again, this was, unlike the first letterpress print, which was actually using leaded type, this is using a digital font. I think it's maybe Saban. I tend to go for the classics instead of, that's fun. I probably didn't tell you, but I did have a past as a designer, and so I come from the age where we actually hand drew type to be able to understand the anatomy of type. And so I found that I couldn't find my voice in the world of design, but I found it in the art community, and it's strange for me to come back into type, but with like a lot of respect for type and for language and for fonts and for all the language that goes around it. Maybe I should take a sip of water. So when I was telling you about the follower in mechanics, what happens is the disc on the left has a motor, and it has a timing pulley, and so it drives the sun drives the moon, and it takes you through all those different relationships that were set out in the letterpress print. And so I didn't show the video of it because it's all really bleached out when it comes to the text. But again, what I was interested in when you stood between the piece and you watched them, and so this idea of orbiting, which it comes up a lot in my work, and the idea of rotation and wordplay. So here when you put dog and walk together, it's dog walk, or do dust, or downfall. So that the fact that you can have just like ordinary experiences embedded within, like, the larger, I guess, celestial experience. And this one also doesn't show very well in the sort of video form, but I think of this like kind of a remix. It's like this little machine that there's a drum inside on the left with 14 faces, and a drum inside on the right, and then stars in the middle. So it does this random generation of different text combinations. And so sometimes it's like things from popular culture, sometimes it's more existential, sometimes it's just weird. I think, a lot of my worrying about, I've done a lot of thinking about the art community and the art, the global art market, and, where we are in this whole, big picture, and art stardom, and, a lot of that was at the initial beginnings of this piece, and then it just kind of got blasted out, and let those concerns fall away. But it could be super stardom or art stardom or stardust. Good grief. I don't know where good grief comes from except for Charlie Brown, but I was really thinking like, why the hell do they call it good grief? All my grief's been bad grief. Like why did they call it good grief? Like that just doesn't make any sense. So I did this neon piece, you know, and I was thinking of it like kind of, well, I think Ivan Jurakic, who's the curator at the gallery where this showed, had an interesting take on it. He called it a linguistic circuit. And in a way it is like, you know, it's like these contradictions that, you know, kind of call and response. And I had to, you know, I was thinking about whether I thought of it as a sculpture or as a sign. So it was located quite high on the wall, which again kind of makes a reference to it being more of a sign. And then just a commercial context of neon. So if you run into any good grief, can you tell me?
Is it a sign from above?
It's sign from above, exactly. Then I was taking the piece to my gallery, and because it's on kind of a timing animated circuit, it means that off each, you know, normally you could put an electrode and have your wiring, you know, so you end up with one wire coming down, but because these are separate circuits, it meant that there was going to be 6 wires trailing down the wall, and then all of a sudden this wiring just takes over your piece, because at UWAG I could go right through the wall and just have all the wiring, the other gallery could have the wiring behind the wall. So I was thinking, oh my God, like this is my grief, what am I going to do? And I decided to make a word bubble, so all the circuits are in behind, so it's a bit elevated from the wall and everything is tucked in back there. And then at the exhibition, I was, you know, thinking about with mechanics, you know, it's so, the pieces become so performative and there's like duration involved. And I was really worried because I had like 3 really major mechanical or kinetic pieces in the show, and I didn't want viewers to be like just oversaturated with that experience, but I wanted to create a piece that would have like again some aspects of you couldn't receive the piece all at once, that you needed to spend time in front of it. So I created this acrylic piece with the cubes, so it's referencing the white cube, and behind it there's LEDs. So it's the first time I used DMX programming, and so it's salt and salts and salter and salsa, salsas, sale. So it goes through all the different iterations, and then it moves across to all the words that begin with L and or A, and then L and then T, and it exhausts all the words in that vocabulary. And it's kind of like a little bit again like one of these a bit like a game. I think maybe there was even a game called Bogle or Boggle that was a little bit in this configuration. But it, again, is building duration into text and into language. And I didn't think you could see the text here, so I had more of the stills, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. And so this is coming too close to the end. This piece was a really kind of crazy piece to work on. It's again a kinetic piece where I have 4 rotating circles, and again I was thinking about, you know, our relationships, and relationship to the art world and relationship to the sun and the moon. But mostly I was thinking about how male artists tend to eclipse female artists, and just like how, you know, irritated I was by that, you know, going through, I had done all this work that was after modernist artists, and just going through the books and just seeing like, you know, how few female modernist artists were represented, and just thinking how privileged sometimes male artists were. And so I did this piece, which some people read as sexual, and Oh, I didn't really intend it that way. So it's a poem, and I thought of it like the mask is like the curtain on a stage, and each line of type is a character, and they come on the stage individually. And then, so each motor, because the circumference of the circles are different, each motor has a different speed, but it was really important that they all exit at one time, so like kind of going off the stage. So, you know, in a way where the good grief, bad grief is kind of like a bit like a cartoon that was, you know, functioning in a way that was, you know, how comedy is and tragedy are so closely connected. But this one for me was like very kind of gentle piece and kind of trying, you know, to be very kind of connotative with a very simplistic set of 4 lines. This one here isn't so subtle. It's I was thinking, man, how can you put give a message using just one letter? So the message is IOU, and it's again all backlit with LEDs and is animated, so the I and then the O and the U come on. But thinking about like the relationship with the artwork and the viewer, the artist and the viewer, who owes who, and just, you know, the piece itself, the autonomy of the piece, and the autonomy of the letter form. So all those interconnected. It's a simple piece, but it was kind of, you know, the really fun thing about typography is just that ability to experiment. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is a piece that's in progress. Well, I was thinking about labor and, you know, that alliteration, she sells seashells by the seashore. And then I made up, she cleans clam shells by the clearing. She washes watercresses by the waterfall. She strings sunlight. Think of it in a subversive way about, like, you know, like trying to, through very subtle actions, I call it 5 acts of dissent. Maybe there'll be more. And that's it.
So I was thinking about the good grief, bad grief. I have this sketch that I made, which I really like. I was, as the New Year, I'll talk a bit about my practice, but as we were sort of approaching New Year's, I didn't know how to respond to, you know, what 2017 would be, so I started doing all these sketches, and this was my sort of good grief.
Oh!
Good grief child. Good grief.
I really connect.
Good grief, bad grief. All right, so I'm going to talk about my sketching, and through that talk a bit about the typography work that I'm doing. And I've done there's a lot of projects that I've done. I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff. So things like EyeWriter, this eye tracking device that we made with a paralyzed graffiti writer, that I think there's a lot of things I would love to talk about, or there's a typeface that we did with the car, and all of these sort of typography projects. I'm going to skip them. I'm just going to go into kind of recent stuff that I've been doing. But Greg mentioned that I helped start and run a school in New York called School for Poetic Computation. And the story of the sketching that I'm going to do really comes from the school and the classes that I teach and the sort of the way we run the school. This is a school based in New York, School for Poetic Computation. I taught for many years at Parsons. So I was at Parsons Design School in New York, probably for like 10 years as an adjunct and then as a professor. And a group of us got really tired of the university life. And if you get me a beer later, I can tell you why. But we were like, all right, let's get out of here. Let's start our own thing. So we started this alternative program, and very much like this kind of spirit of this workshop that some of you are participating in, is this program where people come for 10 weeks to study and learn about code, electronics, and theory, and really like using the computer and computation, but for making poetry, like for creating poetry. And we do a lot of stuff, like students learn how to build a computer from scratch. So actually learning about the electronics and the logic behind computation. They learn coding, they learn theory, and we then apply these things to artistic practice. And one of the things that I teach in the school, I teach this class, which I really love, which is called Recreating the Past. And in this class, we study different artists. So every week I will come in and I'll talk about a different artist. And then the homework assignment for the students is to take one of this artist's artwork and recreate it using modern tools. So artists like Olga Korper, who started the visual language workshop at MIT. She was the design director at the MIT Press. And we talk about her work and the sort of kind of pioneering work that she was doing in the 90s with typography and movement. And students will take her work and study it and then recreate it. Every week we focus on a different artist. Vera Molnar is a Hungarian artist based in Paris. And she was doing pen plotter drawings in the 70s. So she was writing software to create these drawings. Students would study her work, try to understand her algorithms. Things like this. This is a beautiful project where she tried to code her mother's handwriting. She studied her mother's handwriting, and she tried to write the algorithms to recreate her mother's handwriting. Students would study this work and then try to recreate this using code. And so I love this class, because I just come and I get to talk about people that I love, and then the students study them, and then they make things in response to these artists. John Maida, who, a really important pioneer in the media art world, comes directly out of Olga Korper's work at the MIT Media Lab. And so somebody like Maida, who created these Morisawa posters, students would study these posters and then recreate them. And we set up a project. We were invited to participate at a music festival. They said, we want the school to come. And so what we suggested to the festival is that we'll just show our homework assignments, that we'll take the homework for the class and just set it up at this music festival. And this is what we sent them. We said we're going to show the code and the result. We came to the music festival. I love it. All of our gear just said Poetic on it, which looked pretty awesome. And we set up this installation where we showed the code on the right side and the visuals on the left side. And the idea is that you would see actually like, if a line of code would change, like a number would change in the code, you could see the corresponding change in the visuals. So, and the sketches that we showed were based on 5 different artists. And then people could come and kind of watch this. And it was a bit like watching a movie, except you were watching this movie of code and visuals. I told the students to wear sunglasses because we're using these really bright LED screens. A little bit about my approach first, and then walk you through the process and kind of get to typography work. But every day I wake up and make a sketch and post it. I have this certain set of rules that I'll kind of talk through. So this interesting thing happened this year, or in the last couple of years, which is a lot of my friends in the media art community, they went like either in the direction of machine learning or VR. Like everybody was like, oh, VR is the new thing. And like a bunch of people made this hard right turn towards VR. And then a bunch of people made this hard left turn towards machine learning. And then I said, I just want to go straight. I love computer graphics. I just want to do, I don't want to go to the right or to the left, I want to go straight. And I just love this kind of like, for me, this is what I got excited about code. Is this sort of work, and I just want to keep doing it. So I just like, my friends are reading papers about machine learning, I'm reading papers about shapes and thinking about shapes and geometry. Also graphic design. I don't have a traditional graphic design background, but I really like kind of this intersection of, graphic design and popular culture. But then also like, what is the computer inherently good at? And there's this thing that I really love that I recommend you check out if you're not familiar with, which is there's this genre of music that people create using MIDI, where they create these musical tracks that are physically impossible to play, where you're basically playing like every note on the keyboard. They have these tracks that are like millions of keys being pressed, and the music is fucking incredible. Like, it's incredible. It's not possible to play this with, our 10 fingers, but you can make the computer do some really weird stuff. And so when I try to do the sketches, I think about like this is I love this as a kind of art form. Just doing weird stuff. Sorry. This book, okay, my desktop is not as clean as your desktop.
I cleaned up before I came.
I found this book from the 90s. This is Osama Satu, this book. It's all about computer design. It's really like amazing about generative design practices. Like I love this book so much. Like the graphical language in this book is just, it's like so 90s and just awesome and rad. Go through the whole book, but the end of this book has he has this great thing that he says. I think this is like the best sentence ever. He's like, I would like to thank all these people. I would love to thank my favorites, the Russian avant-garde, Futurism, and Bauhaus, whose brilliant typefaces and designs have in many ways shaped my own mind. If the artists of these movements are alive now to work with computers, I'm certain they would discover new artistic possibilities. The work of past ages accumulates and is remade again. And this sentence, like this idea, the work of past ages accumulates and is remade again, like that sentence I think is really profound. This idea that it's the job or the responsibility of artists to remake things, like that you don't have to do, your job is to take the things that have come before and remake them in your own voice. And for me, this was really liberating to read this sentence and share it with my students and just like, yeah, we can take these things from the past, we can recreate them. I do it every day. There's a lot of people who are like crazy about this idea of like doing something every day. There's Seinfeld has this thing, it's like he made a joke every day, and this is a whole kind of like startup culture thing about doing things every day. I'm not really serious about that. My wife wants to go camping. I'm not going to take a laptop with me. There are people who are really crazy about doing something every single day. I do it, 99% of the time. This is my philosophy. Most days, occasionally close about 5. The other thing is that I just do what I feel like. People, oftentimes when you are doing this daily sketching, people will request things. My favorite thing to say is DJ does not take requests. And then I love these rules we have in the school posted, but I just love this idea the only rule is work. These are the rules. John Cage, this is Sister Coretta. God. Sorry?
Karita Kent.
Yeah, Coretta Kent? Karita Kent. Karita Kent. Sister Karita Kent made these 10 rules, and John Cage popularized them, put them on Merce Cunningham's studio on the wall. But I love this rule 7, all the rules work. And then just like work, and that's what I try to do. Another thing is I try to document as much as possible and just share. I saw this guy on the subway. He was wearing spectacles, the spectacles that record. He had a camera, he had his phone, and he had a camera taking a picture of the phone, and then I'm taking a picture of him. Like 4 cameras happening. I think as an artist, you need to be in that mindset. It's like always making recordings, screenshots, etc., and just trying to share as much as possible. I also just like want to work as quickly as possible. So I love this. If somebody had to write, I will make better choices again and again and again. But like you can see by the end, they were like, oh, I can just do one line. So that, I think this is actually style. Like style is the shortcuts. It's the tricks. It's the things that you do to get through the work quickly. And that. Sorry? Bart Simpson, yeah. There's as a designer, Jennifer Daniels has this great thing that she said, which is you want to be part Bart Simpson and part Lisa Simpson.
Oh.
That actually, like, that's like the key is to have have the right ratio of Bart Simpson and Lisa Simpson. No. And there's an artist, Alison Parrish, has this great talk at I.O. She creates generative bots. She makes bots that go on Twitter that post things. Like kind of poetry bots that she writes. She writes code to generate poetry. And she describes them as almost these kind of satellites that she's sending off into space, and they're just sending images back, and sometimes it's garbage, and sometimes it's beautiful. And I just almost, I want to be a bot. So when I'm making these sketches, I'm just trying to like go out into space and try to find things of beauty. So I'll kind of walk you through my process, and I'll get to some of the typography stuff. I had a student, Yuki Yoshida, who was, he was doing this project where he was trying to draw circles in code. And there are many different algorithms for actually drawing a circle, telling the computer to draw a circle. Like how would you write the software for that? And I sent him an email like describing a potential way, and then I coded it, which is really simple, which is to say like, start with a rectangle, pick a random point on one of the 4 walls, and then pick a random point on one of the 4 other walls. And if that line intersects the circle, don't draw it. But if it doesn't intersect the circle, draw it. So in a way, it's a kind of drawing by absence. All of these lines don't touch that circle in the center. The lines that do touch the circle, we don't draw. So I wrote him this, I said like, here's this approach, and then I coded it, and I got so excited about this, I was like, oh, this looks pretty cool. Then I tried to put words in there. So I tried the word love, and that didn't come out so great. Then I tried a smiley face. That didn't come out so great. And then I was like, okay, what if those lines were actually bouncing, right? What if those were like rays of light and actually bouncing off the letter forms? What would that look like? And that got me excited. I started to write these algorithms that would try to figure out, like, how do I bounce a line off of the type, and what can I do with that? So that really started to get excited about light, and the initial sketches that I made all involved light. And the nice thing about this is that I wrote this simulation software, and then I would wake up every day and I would say, like, where's the light coming from? And I had really 2 choices. Like, where's the light coming from, and what are the walls that the light is bouncing off of? And then I would just change those parameters and make new sketches. So the first sketch, like we do always these sort of Happy New Year sketches. First sketch was just like saying Happy New Year's and having this sort of light bounce around. And then I got really excited about the word love. And I think that's just from seeing, I forgot the name of the sculptor who does this big sculptor, and you know that
Robert, Indiana.
Yeah, Robert, Indiana. Just thinking of this like L-O-V-E as a sculptural form, and also for this kind of work, it's this mixture of like really sharp edges and curves that you get different effects with the reflection. And doing simple things where you would say like, I'm going to have parallel rays of light that move from the center line, and at the bottom there'll be a few walls, and at the top there'll be a lot of walls. Again, doing stuff with typography, having like parts of the letters appear and disappear, seeing what that looks like. The interesting things where you have like walls that grow and contract. So you have this light that's moving around, and then you have these walls that kind of like get larger, and they trap the light, and then the light's bouncing around, and you start to see these different looks. Sometimes, for me, this kind of thing is really exciting. It's this really simple geometry, just like triangles. But then when I add light to it, you're getting these interesting kind of effects. Like now, it doesn't look like computer graphics in the same way. A lot of times I go back and forth for doing stuff that's like really like super geometric. Or like, I don't know, feels like I should be in a nightclub in Berlin. Or like, I don't know, get it, you know, do the infinity symbol. Doing this stuff with like things that almost look like caustics. I got excited about refraction. So if the light hits the wall and actually bends, this projection, you have to see it on my computer screen. This projector is a little, doesn't show you all of the range, but it's like, for me, this look is really interesting, where you're having rays of light that are bouncing and refracting, and so you're getting this kind of weird sort of organic look to things. Sometimes very simple things like, this is a very few number of rays bouncing into simple geometry, but doing lots of bounces. And so you get these weird sort of plaid patterns. I did experiments with color, so having colored light. I made an interactive version, so I really like when I create these sketches to make ways for people to come and try it. So this has a camera from above. There's a light table, and I've laser cut these pieces out of acrylic. And you can put them down, and then the camera is seeing where those edges are. So you're sort of setting up the walls for the light to bounce off of. there's a button you can press that changes there's like 12 different modes for where the light is coming from. And I really like, so I cut all this like type, and then people were like discovered, because it's very physical, right? It's, you come and the camera sees your body, like your body becomes part of it. And then people started to just hack it and like use their hands or like put their face down. And I really love these kinds of projects that are very physical. They are, you can really see this process where people come to the artwork and they immediately understand it because they see themselves. So it's very physical. But then it goes to their brain and they try to figure out these relationships, like what's happening. And then it goes back to their body. And I love to watch this process of sort of like body, brain, body. For me, that pathway is really interesting. Okay, well, skip that. All right, so I have a 7-year-old, she was 7-year-old at the time. Now she just turned 8. Stepdaughter, and when I was doing these sketches, she was having trouble sleeping. So I'd go to her room, like read books, hang on her. She wanted me to like stay in her room until she would fall asleep. So we'd like hang out and do stuff, and then I would, when she was going to sleep, I would take out my laptop and make a sketch. She'd wake up, I would show it to her like, every morning. And then when we started, she loved everything that I did. She was like, oh, that's amazing, I'm hypnotized, like that's the coolest thing. And then at some point she's like, oh, you're repeating yourself. She started to get more critical. And then in a way she was like, almost like my art director. And one day she's like, because I kept showing her all those black and white reflection things, so she's like, you gotta do color, you have to do color. Driving me crazy. So I woke up one day, see here, and I just got really excited about blobs. And I go back and forth, and for me, I really like reflection or things that have to do with lines, and I think I just have two sort of modes that I like either things that are just about lines or things that are about blobs. And for me, a blob is like a connected shape, and a line is just this line in space. And so I started to make blobs to make her happy. Then I got happy. I got really excited about just sort of blobby shapes. And how could I shade them? How could I color them and make these kind of organic, almost like living creatures? How would they move? If they could talk, what would they say? And I just got excited about blob shapes. And sometimes the diagnostic things look more interesting than the outcome. So you post the diagnostics, or you get these weird kind of discoveries. Sometimes it's really interesting. I make a sketch like really quickly. I tried to do something else, it didn't work, and I made this sketch and I posted it where I just took 2 blobs and I connected like nearest points. And people really liked this, and they liked it more than I liked it. Like you put it up there, people, hit the heart button, you can see what people like, what people don't like. And there's something really fascinating as an artist to sort of know like, oh, people see something in this that I don't see. What is that? Or something like there's some certain things that I love that other people don't love. Like, why is that? It's almost like different wavelengths, and sometimes we're in sync and sometimes we're out of sync. And I think that's really interesting to learn from. For me, it just seemed like the negative space, for that seemed really fascinating. So I started to do like different studies of negative space, because most computer graphics are additive, where you're just sort of adding layer on top of layer, like a painting. But could you actually, when you draw something, reveal, almost like cutting, like cut instead of add on top? So you like put these sketches out and try to pick up like what are people seeing this that I don't see? And then sometimes you have things like, I was obsessed with this idea of like overlap shapes and like trying to figure out the intersections. This is really hard. It's really, really, really hard. And like nobody liked this, but I love it. So, like I was fascinated with this stuff, and yeah. Love blob, can do blobs forever. Got really excited about images on blobs. This freak, my 7-year-old, this freaked her out. She did not like this. And then I got obsessed with blobs inside of blobs. Like, could you have almost a kind of layering Could you have like them react to each other? Almost like there's this thing on Instagram or YouTube where people take layers of paint and they keep pouring like different colors. I just love the way that looks, these like rings of paint. Could you have like rings of things that are responding to each other? So I started to get obsessed with this, tried to code that, it didn't work very well. How could you have rings of things? Got a little better. More rings. And then sometimes I'll like figure it out and then I'll just like push it in different directions and see what happens. So like add a bit of noise and see what that feels like. Sometimes I'm like in a really chill and relaxed mood and then the sketch will show that. Sometimes I'm like not in a chill and tried to make the blobs 3D. Blob on blob action. For me, that's really exciting. Blob on blob action, then made it 3D. I do a lot of like, I kind of hate 3D graphics, so I do a lot of 2D things. These are like 2D, like my heart is in 2D, but then I like make it 3D. So I do a lot of kind of 2D to 3D, 3D to 2D. But as I was doing these blobs, I was thinking about other, like, what are other closed shapes that I could use? And type seemed like a really good thing to try, where you would say, like, I'm going to take letter forms when I was doing these rings. Like, could I take letter forms? What would that look like? And then I was like, how could I animate it? Could I take this type and, like, make the type come to life? Like, how could I, like, have this type, like, move or feel like a creature? And started to experiment with, like, just like, what would happen if I, like, twisted the type or, like, did a little thing like make the P look like it's running. And then I was like, how do I make the blob turn into the type? And this is fucking hard. This is really hard stuff where I'm like screaming at the blob like be a L or be a B. And it's like I don't know what you're talking about. So I worked super hard on that. I can show you this. Oh no, wait. This is like great. Where I got better. I got closer. But you can see, so I'm like, oh, okay, be an E, and then I'm like, oh, be an F, and it's like, what are you talking about? Okay, and then it gets it. G, like some of the transitions, it's like pretty, it gets it okay. And some of them, it's like, what do I do? Then I got that, I was like, I don't even know what to do. Like, it was like one of these things where I built it, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. So then I tried to say, like, could I have the type actually bounce off each other? So here's some S's, and then I don't even know what those are. And that, like, have almost like an alphabet, and that like a blob alphabet. Have the blob alphabet like bounce off each other. And for me, this started to get really interesting and like a little weird. And it reminded me of these Wes Wilson posters. Like, that's a really interesting kind of period of typography, like this sort of hand-drawn and very organic. To me, this felt like something kind of magical. And once I had a thing where I could do a kind of organic movement, I always want to try to say, like, how could I push it around or interact with it? For me, it's like these physical things. The fact that it's animated, like that's exciting. Like, could I touch it? Like, I would just want to touch it and see what happens when I touch it. Make it, and then I'm like, how do I like interact with it? Could I hook it up to a camera? And this sort of thing, I just have a webcam, you know, and like capturing the pixels of my hand and then using that to manipulate this letter form. And it really feels like I'm touching something. There's nothing there. It's all simulated, but it really felt like I'm like hurting this 3 when I crush it. I did a bunch of, I was really freaked out about the New Year's, but this was my New Year's card. And where I like get the 6 all unhappy and then it turns into a 7. Another thing that I got really fascinated with was stretching. So I love this Grace Jones album cover. Like, this image was floating around on the internet. I think this is the former Prime Minister of Korea, if I got that right, South Korea. I just love this idea of like, could you take like type at some point and just like find a point where you could just cut it and stretch it, right? If you were to like almost have an X-Acto blade and like cut it at one point and stretch it. So I started to do these experiments where I would take the type and like find really good like points across the letter form that where if I pulled it, it would not break the letter form too much. So these were some initial experiments. And then I tried doing it like multiple times, where I would cut it and then cut it again and then cut it again. And it starts to get really weird and like look like cool. Like I don't know what to do with. I didn't know what to do with it. I did it. Bounce around. I started to do some illustration work. I did this animation for the New York Times for this article about the Maltese language, where we like used it and animated some phrases. I don't know what to do with this cut type. Blah, 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 cutting. Different, again, just different operations. I love pushing. There's this really beautiful design of the Beijing Design Week Identity that Lava made. And I just got obsessed with this. Like, I love the way this looked, and I really love these ovals, and this idea that you could have this graphical system of ovals that are like all touching each other. So I made these very simple experiments with ovals, like where I say, like, I'm gonna have 3 ovals in the top row, and then I'm just gonna change the amount of weight and just have them like move and get bigger or smaller. And I got kind of obsessed with this. I did a lot of experiments with type where I tried to do the same thing. Using spatial divisions, like cutting the type up and seeing what happens if you add energy. I tried to raise, my wife and I were trying to raise money. We did a bike tour to raise money for a nonprofit. So here again, just taking like type and kind of pushing it around. I love lines. Like, again, this idea of like blobs or lines. So I did a lot of experiments just like, what happens if you have the general like rule of how you should, like, you think about a line almost as a path where you're sort of saying going forward and turn right and turn left. You have the general rule, but you kind of like get drunk a little bit and change how much you do. And for me, this is really exciting to sort of say like, can we have a rule system but then mess it up and see where it breaks and what's interesting? Here's like I don't know what I'm doing here. I just love this idea. I don't know who made this, but this is a drawing. This is Paul Smith, and the idea is that you there's one line for this cursive, and you pull it, and the line is almost like a wire or a string, and it's like, that can be anything. That's a beautiful idea. And so I did these experiments where I would have the type like almost uncurl, like use the curvature of the line, and then have it like uncurl and curl back, and it just feels like it's kind of alive. I went through a pendulum phase. I guess this is pendulum drawing typography. So I'm not really a design. I didn't go to design school. I went to fine art school. I went to Parsons, which is like a program called Design Technology. But we had this one like design. We didn't get a proper design education, but we had this one homework assignment in class that I really loved, where we took type and we like cut it up and connected type. So you take type, like a typeface, and you cut it with like an X-Acto blade, and then you say like, I'm going to take this curve and connect it to this curve. Like really focusing on the geometry and what kind of new shapes emerge. So this is like this type walker where I'm walking along like a letter form, and then I'll just say like, now you're an M, or now you're a Y, or an E, and just like walk a little bit along an E, and walk a little bit along a Y, and think about this line almost as, kind of a continuous path. Again, I tried the word love. I keep using the word love, so I tried the word love. I don't know how legible this was. Lots of letters. Again, usually when I get something to work, then I'm like, how could I scale it by 100, 1,000, and see what happens when you put a lot into the system. I did reflection off of type. People thought this was an ad for Facebook. But just thinking like, what if you have like rays of light that bend in the type? Like that's interesting. Like maybe there's interesting forms that come out of that. Spatial stuff where you say like, I'm going to write code. This is all shader programming, but I'm going to write code that's based on the letter form, and just have like the color of the pixel be based on its proximity to the other points of the letter form. And you get this kind of crazy look where it's like the typography is controlling, like every pixel on this image is controlled by the relationships of those lines. I got really obsessed with matching. So if you have, here, if you have like a set of points, like let's say you have a letter and you pick 100 random points in one letter and 100 random points in the other letter, what is the best match from like this point to this point? Like how would you, if you had to connect them, what is the most efficient way to connect them so you're not like traveling that far? So I did these experiments where I tried to connect letter forms. I really like this. This is like goes to 0, and then 1, and then 2. Just like taking these random points and connecting them so you get kind of like, you know, almost like a path where the point just like becomes a new letter. I really love like projection, like taking a set of points and projecting them out into space. So here's some like just type where you're kind of moving around, and as you get closer to it, it wants to go away from you. Like the closer you are to it, the more it's like, get out of here. So it bends and warps in an interesting way. I love doing very simple kind of geometric transformations, so rotation. So taking like just a letter form and saying, like, what happens if you spin it? And it's just like, you know, what does that look like? Or like, you know, spin it and like just step out a little bit. And for me, this is, you know, it's like, sometimes I watch these machine videos where you watch like how they make pasta, you know, and you like, see this sort of mechanical process, but then this like, you know, weird pasta noodle comes out. So sometimes I'm like get inspired and try to code these things. All right. Okay, I'll show a few graphical things. It's just really simple stuff. Like there's really simple like geometric rules. Like if you have 3 points, that defines a circle. So you just need three points in space, and there's an equation that will tell you the circle that goes through them. But when those points are in a straight line, that circle is infinite, right? That is like this amazing moment where that circle, the radius is infinity, right? Those 3 points are collinear. That circle is like, you know, you can't see it. It just goes on forever. And what I love is that you could write code, just have these 3 points kind of dance around. But that moment of that circle opening up, you can feel like what that feels like. And sometimes what will happen is I'll discover a small thing like that and say like, what, you know, how can I use this? And then like, usually I just try a lot of them. Like that MIDI keyboard, I'm like, let's try 100, let's try 1,000. And have them go in sync and out of sync, and what does that feel like? Let's just try more, put more on there. I did a lot of stuff with, these are blobs that are made out of circles, so it's a kind of different blob system. I got really excited about, like, again, I kind of hate 3D, but then like, could I just like make it sort of 3D just by shooting lines down? It's like for me it feels like, you know when you're like in high school and you're not paying attention to the teacher and you just start like drawing something and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna add a line and now it becomes 3D. And for me it's the same sort of thing where it feels almost like doodling. But make these shapes that kind of remind me of these Alvar-Aalto shapes. Okay, back to blobs or blobland. This looked like a creature. All right, let's skip ahead. I'll show a few more things. I'm really obsessed with the body, like Merce Cunningham or Oscar Schlemmer, like this kind of like weird costumes, extensions of the body. For me, the body, or Louise Bourgeois, these like body transformation, for me, that's another shape. Like that's a blob, that's also a blob. And what could I do? How could I have things sort of shooting off of the body? Or again, like the same sort of rotation of the type, could I take the body and rotate it so that I'm saying like, how does this body extrude in space? And doing like those kind of offsets, and then what happens if I rotate the offset? So it feels almost like a kinetoscope or something, kind of a physical form. I do a lot of stuff where I attach physical things, like here's a body that's moving, and I've attached these kind of weird, like, you know, bouncy shapes, and so the body feels like, you know, it's the movement that activates them. I really love this one. It's like these kind of feathers that kind of go out from you, and then they like come in. So they're like out, and it just feels like, you know, you're a bird, and they come in, it's like you're hiding or something. It's like this feeling. There's artists that I'm inspired by. Keitra Dean Dixon is an amazing illustrator and designer whose work I love. She does a lot of these sort of layers, and I got obsessed. She was making these drawings just out of circles. So I got obsessed with this. I took the body and cut it horizontally. So if you have this shape and you have horizontal lines, you're going to have intersections, and you'll always have an even number of intersections. So sometimes you'll have like 2 intersections, sometimes you'll have 4 intersections or 6, but you'll always have an even number of intersections of a horizontal line and a shape. And I got really excited about this, and I made this sketch where I took the body, cut it, and then like drew it with circles. So just said like, what happens if this body is made out of circles? And it's yeah, for me, I really like popcorn. My 7-year-old wrote this. Popcorn man, circles, body made out of body. And I've been doing a lot of stuff with like tracking. I want to show a few more typography projects, but actually, let me show. This is the thing. I really love daily sketching because in a way, it's this kind of diary, and I can go back and I can feel almost the mood that I had at that day. And I remember the first year, it was the anniversary. That's my father. It was the anniversary of my father passing away. And the reason that I did this daily sketching, in a way, is like, how do I knew it was going to be this really tough year. And thinking about my father passing away, and also the act of turning 40 was like, I don't know, I was just so like mortified with what the year was going to bring. And so I remember as I was approaching the anniversary, I was thinking like, what do I do? Like, I can't do these like stupid, goofy sketches when you know, around this time when my father passed, it was like such a tough time the previous year. And I got obsessed at that moment with this, like this work of Etienne Jules Mouret and this like people that were recording movement, like early recording of movement, Muybridge, or this sort of thing of just like capturing a movement. And there are these movements that you can get, like people who've been motion captured, you can get walk cycles. And I found a walk cycle. And there's something really amazing about this kind of walk cycle where you're just watching these like 16 points. And these are the points of your arms and your legs and your torso and your head. And just watching these points kind of like walk in space. For me, there was something kind of like, it was just like the right movement at the right time, just to feel like how I felt, maybe how I was alone in this moment, or just, it wasn't like sad or happy, it just was this thing that I could take, and I could say like I'm gonna take this walking, and I'm just gonna explore what it feels like to be walking, or like what happens if I take 2 people walking and connect them, or like I'm walking and then I'm like covered in hair, and then, you know, like that movement was the right thing at the right time, and there's something about kind of daily sketching where you discover these patterns or these things that, like, they tell you about yourself. This is my friend, he's a student of mine, and he had really advanced stage cancer, and I remember that he loved sine waves when he took my class, and so I made this sketch for him when he was in the hospital. It was like one of the last sketches that he, because he would always like everything that I did, and was the last ones that he liked before he passed away, but it was like this moment where I could make this, I could respond to the situation through making. This, I mentioned good grief, I'm going to call this good grief, bad grief now, but like I was freaked out, I was totally freaked out after Trump won the election and what the new year was going to be, and I just was thinking a lot about kind of how can we celebrate the New Year's? Or like when we were all out protesting, like I went to JFK, I was protesting with everybody, you know, all my friends after the travel ban, and so I made all these sketches that are just about pushing. And they just were like describing the feeling of like what it felt like to be out in the street pushing. I just like took that feeling and tried to put that into a sketch. Or like this was actually kind of cool. This was in my daughter's school. All the students in the school made a pledge for like when for the inauguration, like they pledged what they would you know, promise to defend. And then we wrote, my wife and I wrote code to connect all the pledges and make this kind of infinite line. of pledges. So much stuff. Okay, I'm going to show a few type projects. I got invited to make a project with Margaret Atwood for the London Literature Festival. Working with Margaret Atwood is like working with Beyonce. So I wrote a proposal, and then I sent it to the publisher, sent it to the editor, sent it to her agent, sent it to her assistant, and she was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we like communicated in this really like roundabout way. But she wrote this book called Hagseed, and we took sections from the book and we brought them to life. So we made an interactive project where you could come and use your body. You would step up to the mat, and then you would see a quote that from the section of the book, and then you would see yourself, but reflected through the text of the book. But Margaret's really amazing. This is the first time we met at the opening. We went to take a photo, and she stole my hat off my head, and she put it on her head. But the book is actually really sad. It's full of these dark moments, or feeling alone, or feeling like you're isolated or an island. So we had one scene where you would see yourself, but surrounded by text. We took the words from the book, and we wrapped it around your body. There's another one that's all about kind of plotting, and you see yourself sort of under the text. So as you move, the text kind of wraps around you. Then there's one that's more sort of chaos, and you see yourself as this kind of creature, the text attached to your body. I love it. I was setting up. This guy it was like the night before the opening, this guy just came up and he just started playing, and I couldn't get him to leave. Here's Margaret. She's awesome. She was like so excited. She told me that if Shakespeare was alive today, he'd be using a Kinect. So, and the thing that I loved is this project only worked with one person at a time. So it's like really like kind of a solo experience. But if you held hands with somebody, then the two of you could be part of the project. And this book is actually like, it's a remake of The Tempest. It's like really, really, it's really dark. Like it's a dark book. And what I liked in a way is that this project also, it like brought people together. Like it almost combat some of that energy of the story by facilitating people touching each other and kind of jamming and rocking out and kind of playing. I had this experience with a curator. I was at a festival in Korea. I was talking to this curator. It's a friend of Greg's, this guy Philip. And Philip said, most artists don't know what their value is. He said most art, like the problem with artists is that they don't know where their value, what they do that's valuable. And I was thinking about these open office hours, like that's something that I do, that I like to do. Like I like to sit and talk to students and hear about what they're working on, talk to them about the problems that they're having or questions that they have, and just like focus. And so what I decided to do is spend basically 3 hours every week where I make myself available. I post it on Twitter, and it's usually on Fridays from like 10 to 1, where people will come and talk to me. And I do it, I put this on Twitter, my friend emailed back with this image, and I just like I put these things up, and people come, they meet me in life, they come to see me in the studio or at the school, and I also do it on Skype and Facebook, Skype and Hangout. And I do this pretty much every week. Sometimes when I'm traveling, it's harder. And it's really amazing. Like I meet people from around the world who are interested in code, interested in design, or have questions about, like whatever, how this stuff works, how to make a living, where they should study. And they want to teach. They're working on a workshop. I read people's artist statements. I give people feedback about things that they're applying for. And it's a process, like this thing I really like, which is actually trying to make myself available. It's also really selfish. If somebody emails me and they ask me a question, I say, come to the office hours. If they're not a friend or a client or family, I don't talk to them the rest of the week. And it's amazing. It's amazing to actually say, I'm going to be prepared to listen, like 1 day a week or 3 hours a week. I'm going to be like, my ears will be open to listen, and then the rest of the time, I'm going to do my work and actually be closed. And that's something like, that process has been really invaluable for me. The last thing is I'm going to end with this book. This is River, my stepdaughter, wrote this book. It's called I Am Art. I'm going to read it to you. This is by River the artist. So after we were doing the sketching for about half a year, and I love the idea that she sees my wife and I, like she sees what we do, she's a part of what we do, and she made this book that I find really magical. It's called by River the artist, I Am Art, for a Poe and a Nana art. Art is like you feel free, you feel like you can do anything, and you know what to draw. And if you don't, you look at you. You are the one, and you have your own imagination. And maybe in your imagination, you will see lines and squares. It took me a long time. And in those squares and lines, you will see art. And that art is amazing, and you are too. Haha, stop looking at me. Art, I am art, food is art, anything is art. Thank you.